Hello, my name is Seth Opel, VP of Business Development for SHS Services. And today I'm speaking with Richard Melnick. Richard, thanks for talking to me today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Seth.
You know, Richard, there's a lot of things to say. He's a founder of the law office of Richard H. Melnick LLC. He also has extensive experience with Montgomery County government, over 30 years, actually. Was a principal counsel to the Office of Procurement and head of the Contract Commercial Law Procurement Unit in Montgomery County, dealing with all types of contracts and major initiatives for the county. He also teaches a business law course at Montgomery College, has taught numerous courses for 8 years at University of Baltimore Law School, and he's a frequent speaker on negotiation at various law schools, bar associations, and federal, state, and local governments. And then last but not least is also the past president of the Bar Association of Montgomery County. So a lot of accolades, really excited and happy to be speaking with you today, Richard.
Well, I'm honored by your introduction. Thank you, Seth.
Absolutely. Of course. So the topic today is negotiation, something you're very familiar with, and you know, something that I thought would be interesting for our viewers to hear about. Right off the top, you know, what's really the goal of talking about negotiation?
Great question, Seth. I think that really what we want to do is raise awareness regarding the anatomy of a negotiation. What are the steps? What are the things that you want to be considering in the back of your mind while you're proceeding to prepare and go forward with the negotiation, so that we can all be more comfortable with the process. It can often feel like an artificial process. So the more that we can get comfortable with some of the underlying aspects of the negotiation, the more comfortable and better we can feel during the course of it and be more effective negotiators. So that's really the spirit in which we come forward today with this presentation. So that's what I'm here for. It's a heightening of an awareness exercise.
That's fantastic. I love that. I think, you know, we're, especially in the business world, we're involved with negotiations every day, whether we realize it or not. So, you know, getting a better awareness of it is, you know, such a great idea. So I appreciate that.
Many people say life is a negotiation. So whether you're in the business setting or your personal affairs, we're always communicating and negotiating and presenting something and receiving something. So it's always helpful to kind of brush up and think about the things that are going on during those communications in negotiating.
Absolutely. So just from the top, you know, how would you define negotiation, just kind of broadly?
Well, negotiation, sort of to give a textbook or a working definition for today, it's a process by which two or more people communicate to solve a particular problem over which they have competing needs, interests, and desires. So that's kind of in essence what we talk about a negotiation being, with one of the cornerstones being communication that goes on. You're trying to solve a problem, you're trying to reach agreement, you're trying to find a way to achieve the goals of each party so that they can find common ground and enter into an agreement with one another.
Gotcha. Yeah, communication certainly key, kind of the cornerstone to everything involved here. What about the 10 steps to negotiation?
All right. So today we're gonna that's a good foundation for everybody, a good framework in which to operate, to have some steps to follow during the course of a negotiation. So I've put together 10 fluid steps to a negotiation, and I'll kind of read through them real quickly, and then we can talk about them and how they relate to a discussion during the negotiation. Number one would be preparation and planning. Number two, ice breaking. Number three, agenda control. Number four, informational bargaining. Number five is when you get to the point of proposals, demands, and offers. After you have enough information, the give and take between the parties to be able to formulate those offers, demands, and proposals. And once those proposals and offers and demands are made, there's a segment where you're persuading or justifying your position to the other side, and they're doing the same with you. And through those discussions, yeah, there's very often concessions that are made between the parties. Each side is looking at the facts that are changing during the course of the discussion, perhaps making some concessions and finding ways that the two parties can reach agreement on certain items that each party has more facts concerning. Then you reach the point of either resolution or deadlock in your negotiation. If you deadlock, you can go back up to the beginning and try to prepare and plan to get back to the table if you so desire. If you reach a resolution, you can move on to concluding your negotiation session and move on to the 10th step of memorializing the agreement, which oftentimes is an entirely new negotiation to put into written words that which the parties negotiated. So it's good oftentimes to be putting things in writing during the course of negotiation, at least making notes of the things that you're agreeing upon so that you can have an outline in putting together the agreement that memorializes the agreement.
Sure. You mentioned, you said, I think you called it the 10 fluid steps of negotiation. Talk about that a little bit more.
Sure. Yes. These are 10 steps that you could go through linearly. You could go through steps 1 through 10. But very often what happens is during the course of a negotiation, you go between the steps. You might end up having a situation where you prepare and plan. Your initial preparation and planning, you try to gather as many facts as you can regarding the subject matter of the negotiation, as well as the other party and the interests of that other party. So you're trying to know as many of the facts going in on your side of the table and anticipate the facts that the other side might be dealing with. And as you learn more information through informational bargaining, after having gone through ice breaking, the two parties have to find a way to communicate and kind of get to know each other a little bit, to have a dialogue with one another. And then questions arise: where are we going to have the negotiation? Is it at my office, your office, somewhere in between? And that can break down the negotiation before it even starts sometimes. The Israelis and the Palestinians famously have tried to enter negotiations, and then they can't even agree on the site at which they would meet, and it breaks down there. So then they have to go back to the preparation and planning phase of how do we get the parties back to the table. And then, assuming you get past agenda control and you start exchanging information, you end up you might end up having a different view of your position or the other side's position, especially after each side persuades or justifies their position. So you can see where you could be going between steps 1 through 10, going back from concessions at number 7 to go back to number 5 for another set of proposals, demands, and offers. You can see if it breaks down at number 8, you end up in deadlock. You might have to go back to number 1 or number 2 to prepare and plan to come back to discuss things in a different way. Ice break again, try to save face with one another and get back into the substantive discussions for the negotiation. So you can see how they can go between the different steps, as well as linearly straight down from 1 to 10.
Sure. And that, it strikes me that, that's all the more reason to be familiar and aware of these 10 steps and know them in and out, because, at any point along the way, you could run into a roadblock that forces you to go back to another step or forward to another step as well. So
That's
I
right.
think that's really helpful. There's a lot of factors that go into negotiations. And one of the things that, we deal with a lot in our world is, cost, vendor costs. What kind of factors can drive a vendor cost in a negotiation?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because that sort of brings up the kind of the side issue of the fact that the vendor's cost is on one side, because the vendor's looking at what their costs are to provide the goods or services and trying to factor in some reasonable amount of profit. And on the other side, on the purchasing side, they're trying to figure out what's a fair price. What are the factors that we look at to determine what is fair market value, what is fair, what is reasonable. These are all very much factually based, and really some of the considerations that the vendor might consider in terms of defining their costs, or the purchaser wants to get more information regarding the vendor's costs, would be things and really trying to establish what the value is of that which they're purchasing. They would be considering things like, how long has this vendor been in business? What's their expertise? And what's their reputation and ability and capability to perform the work? What are their overhead costs? What are, in looking at different proposals that you might receive, how do they compare to other vendors in terms of their workforce, the materials that they use, the knowledge that they have? What is the in-house budget that the vendor has that they're dealing with, to factor in, because as a purchaser, you have to consider the fact that they have costs that are associated with bringing those goods or services to you. So getting an understanding of what those are can help move the negotiation along. Pricing sheets from either this particular work, or for work in the past that the vendor has done. What's the level of education? What types of logic and reasoning is the other side bringing to the table to explain what their price is or what their costs are? What are some historic comparisons or market comparisons? Taking a look at their financials to see what their ability is to perform in the marketplace and in this particular solicitation or in this particular work setting. And what's the nature of their personnel? Do they have MIT and Harvard graduates that demand high salaries, and that you're getting a work product that is commensurate with that high level of expertise? Or might they have lower personnel costs? And all of those things could be factored in to the costs that the vendor has. What is a fair price for the purchaser that each side would be considering?
So, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about all these factors that go into the vendor cost. And, it seems to me there's a lot of informational bargaining going on in that phase, right?
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about, information risk and the exchange of information.
Sure. So in terms of, and that's item number 4, informational bargaining. And as much as you're bargaining over some particular goods or services or construction, or land, whatever it is that the negotiation involves, that's the subject matter of the discussion. But in terms of learning more about what the other side has in terms of value or in terms of challenges or opportunities, there are times when one side or the other feels that there's information that can hurt their position. So they look at this and they say, well, in the short term, releasing this information can harm our position in negotiating with the other side. For instance, they might not want to release their budget because then that might give the other side the view that they're able to, that's their initial offer. And when in fact, that's their end offer. That's the most that they can possibly spend. So they might be reluctant to release things that show what their final position might be. So there's short-term risk in releasing that information, but then the party also has to consider the fact that there's a long-term risk of not releasing certain information, especially if it's been requested. So you want to have some, in your arsenal of discussions, you want to be prepared for addressing information that they might ask for and provide reasonable justifications that would persuade the other side as to why it makes sense that they wouldn't want to release certain information. So, and that's all geared toward the fact that you don't, from a long-term standpoint, you don't want to lose credibility for not releasing information, particularly when the other side can learn that from another source, and then you have egg on your face for not having released the information when it was sought. So those are some information risk considerations.
And in a situation like that, I imagine once you lose credibility, it's incredibly difficult to regain it. And that's a strategic advantage to the other party.
That's right. And, similar to the fact that Cornerstone of negotiation is a communication. Trust and integrity along the way are invaluable to a negotiation. You know, each side, the best negotiations, there's a certain amount of trust and integrity that goes on. If one side stops trusting the other, you're not protecting the process at that point. The process can break down because you're not really believing anything the other side is saying. So it's difficult to reach an agreement at that point, and hard feelings can develop.
Talk, if you will, a little bit about the role of anticipation in this negotiation process.
Sure. Well, you know, in dealing with anticipation, you know, I mentioned up at the preparation and planning stage of the fluid steps, you're trying to determine your needs, interests, and desires. You know, you want to speak to the people in your organization that have the ultimate authority and that are really the people behind the scenes for whom you're negotiating. You want to know what you or your organization needs out of this negotiation, so that you can establish the price below which you would walk away, or the price above which you would walk away, depending on which side of the negotiation you're on. So that's the needs. Then you want to look at your interests that you have, the reasons behind those needs. And the reason you want to know what your interests are is because in the event that the other side is not able to meet your need directly, they might be able to come up with enough of your something else, some other creative solution that meets the interests that those needs represented, in place of, or as a substitution for that which you thought you needed when you were establishing your position. So you want to be very conscious of what your interests are behind your needs. And then there's your wants or your desires. Those are the things that you don't necessarily need, but that you want, that you would like to have as part of the discussion. And if you get enough of your wants, there are times when that could replace what you thought might have been a need. So you're looking at these different aspects of what things are your goals or objectives in the negotiation. And so you want to develop that for yourself, and then you want to anticipate those same things that the other side has on their side of the table. So you have a lot less information regarding that. You can look on the internet. You can you might have a past relationship or undertaking with that entity. You might know people that know people in that entity. You might read newspaper articles, you know, whatever it is. You're looking for information that you can glean what the other side's needs, interests, and desires are, so that you can come better prepared to address and ask questions that to further educate yourself regarding the other side and the other side's position to move the negotiation forward, and move it in a way that that is in your best interests.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, you talk about asking the right questions. I want to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but, you know, can you give us a story that kind of, you know, illustrates this concept?
Sure. There's a story about that's called "Remember the Orange," and without going into too much depth on it, picture a village where there a bunch of people are living. A bunch of families are living in a village, and that particular year, the crop for oranges was particularly sparse. They didn't get a lot of oranges, and they came down to the last orange, and there were two families that both needed the orange, and there was a lot of contentiousness between the two families regarding who would get the orange. So in order to bring peace to the community, the village leader brought the two families together and asked, you know, one of the families, "Why do you need the orange?" And the one family said, "We need the orange because our daughter graduated from high school and from college, whatever it was. We need to celebrate that with this orange drink, for which we need the orange juice. And that's our tradition, to celebrate very important family occasions with this juice." And then the village leader turned to the other side and said, "Why do you need the orange?" And the other family said, "Well, it's our child's birthday, and every year, every year we traditionally we bake an orange cake, and we use the orange peel to bake the cake. And so we need the orange for that purpose. So by going through that discussion and looking behind the stated positions and determining what the interests are between the parties and the rationale for that position, the village leader found that we can use this orange in a way that both parties could benefit. One side uses the juice, one side uses the peel, and we have solved the problem. We've developed a creative solution where we don't need two oranges. We can solve that problem with that one orange because we have identified the rationale behind the stated positions of the parties.
I was just going to say that, this, I find that story so interesting because I think it applies to so many different situations. And, particularly today, in our world, people are so divided on, all kinds of stuff, notably politics and things like that. And I feel like people are really dug in and they don't really ask those questions about, why is it that you, feel this way about this issue or vice versa. And, I think if people had a little better understanding of how to ask those questions, we'd be able to come to more reasonable conclusions and agreements, kind of like in this story that you just told.
That's right. And I was going to say, as you were getting into that, Seth, that the moral behind the story is that you want to look behind the stated position, because sides can get dug in and get intractable on a stated position. And by looking behind the reasoning for that stated position, you're in a better position for each side to save face and for each side to develop creative solutions and reach common ground that otherwise was not possible by just looking at the two sides of the spectrum. And you talk about politics being an example. We certainly are in a period of time where there's a lot of divisiveness and two very different points of view at the opposite ends of the spectrum, and finding common ground and finding reasonable possibilities between those two polars, those two poles of the spectrum is the place where you can develop some creative solutions and find a way to achieve success for both parties.
Absolutely. So that's kind of a way to, bring parties together. What kind of restraints exist in this, world of negotiation?
Good question. So when we're in this artificial, so to speak, environment of a negotiation, very often the two sides have different time pressures. So time pressure can be a restraint. So, if one party is aware that the other party is pressured for time, it gives that party who does not have the time pressure an advantage. So so in keeping with other parts of our discussion today, one bit of information that one side would not want to necessarily reveal to the other side is the time pressure they might be under, because that would, if the other side knows about their time pressure, they can just drag their feet and not make concessions that they otherwise would be making to try to achieve a result, because they know the other side needs to reach a deal, and they need to reach a deal within a certain period of time, and they can just let that time go and put pressure on the other side to come closer to what their position is as opposed to what the other party's position was. So time pressure is one. Lack of authority. There are times when there's a negotiation where somebody from one organization might be in a higher position than the other, and tries to use that as an intimidation factor to try to get more out of the bargain than they otherwise might if they were dealing with the CEO of one organization and the CEO of another organization. The opposite side of that, though, is that the advantage that somebody could have if they are lower in authority than the person with whom they're bargaining is to be able to come back, is the ability to say, look, I don't have the authority ultimately to enter into an agreement. I need to go back to our home base and speak to the people with authority before I can reach a final result in our discussions. And that gives the person with the lower amount of authority another bite at the apple to come back with a lower amount than might have been agreed to at the table. So that's an advantage that you can glean from having not having the ultimate authority at the table. Audiences in and outside of the room. Very often we're in a negotiation, and especially in an organizational setting, we're representing other people or an organization, and we come in with a plan based on discussions with different people that are not going to be in the room during the negotiation. And we have to, so the other side has to not only think about the negotiation in terms of the people with whom they're dealing at the table, but also anticipating and thinking, what are the people behind the scenes sending that messages to them that they are their marching orders, so to speak, that they have to proceed with during the course of the negotiation. So you have to be thinking about audiences inside and outside of the room. Extreme demands and threats. If one side or the other makes an extreme demand that's outrageous, that can cut off negotiations right off the bat and force, when we look at the 10 fluid steps, you could be at the stage where you're at demands, proposals, and offers number 5, and then somebody makes an extreme demand that really offends the other side, cuts off the possibility for agreement, and then you're back to trying to prepare and plan and ice break and control the agenda to get back to the table if you need to get an agreement. And I think we talked about trust and the lack of trust deteriorating or eroding the ability to negotiate, and the willingness for each side to be persuaded by that which the other side is bringing to the table. So those are some of the restraints that we have underlying the negotiation that might not be stated up front or in writing during the negotiation, but that are behind, kind of psychologically in the air during the course of a discussion.
Right. I think I've come up against almost all of those restraints at some point or another. One of the ones that really gets me a lot is that audience outside the room. I could give you a dozen examples or more, but do you have any particular example that illustrates that really well?
Well, I like to tell a story about a used car that was being sold by a couple that had a Mercedes-Benz, and they were selling, and they put an ad in the newspaper, and the ad was responded to by a young business person, and so the young business person, looked at what the model was for the Mercedes-Benz, and did a little bit of research on that model, contacted the people who put the ad in the paper. They had a discussion, and the couple invited this business person over to see the car and to discuss negotiating a deal for the car. And so he comes over to their house, and they open the door, and they're very friendly, and they welcome him into the living room, and and what do they have? They have like coffee, and they have German chocolate cake sitting on the table, and then they proceed to tell the story about how they were on their honeymoon in Germany, floating down the Rhine, and talking about a vehicle they wanted to buy at the plant, a Mercedes at the very plant in Germany. And the gentleman says, "Oh, I didn't know what I was in love with more, my new wife, or this car that we were going to be purchasing." And so bringing romance into the situation. And then during the discussion, the young man said, "I've got to go and talk to my fiance to see if she's comfortable with the terms of this agreement." And he leaves the room, and they don't know if he makes the phone call or he doesn't make the phone call, but he comes back after the other side had made an offer, and he says, "Well, as much as I'd like to be able to honor that offer, and speaking to my fiance, she'd rather spend that extra money on the honeymoon instead of the vehicle, so I'm not able to do that." So that's an example of an audience outside the room. The couple that didn't even know if he ended up talking to that person, but he had the ability to leave the room ostensibly talked to his other person who was driving the deal from outside. The couple didn't have any control over persuading or justifying their position to this outside party, and the outside party had an influence over the deal, over the position of one of the parties in the deal, and so they had to then adjust to that, but that's an example of how sometimes you're dealing with an issue that you don't have any control over, and you even have less control over because the person who's driving that aspect of it is not even in the room, but has the ear of the person who is in the room.
Yeah, it's definitely a very powerful dynamic going on there.
That's right. And you talk about challenges and opportunities in a negotiation. Sometimes we deal with different personalities. There's certain people we get along with better than others. It's just the way things are. And you might have one side might have more or less knowledge than the other. There might be emotional gaps between the two parties. There might be a willingness or unwillingness by one side or the other to be creative and trying to adapt and find different solutions. So we look at these different challenges and opportunities and try to plan and prepare and develop questions that are effective in learning more about what the other side's position is, and so that we then can bring forth reasonable arguments and justification that will persuade the other side to be more amenable to your position or to our position.
Gotcha. Yeah, that leads to my next question, which is something that's really interesting to me personally, is the idea of interdependence.
Yes.
Give me a little insight on that.
Sure. Yeah, and this goes to that point that I made about we all have different personalities, and sometimes we get along and are more comfortable dealing with certain people than other people, and it's not something you can really control. It's just the dynamic between two individuals. So there's a quote by May Parker Follett that kind of addresses this a little bit, where the quote is, "I never react to you, but to you plus me. Or to be more accurate, it is I plus you reacting to you plus me. That is, in the very process of meeting, we both become something different. Interdependence, in other words, involves change and learning." So the sort of the bottom line of that quote is that you and I could be speaking, Seth, and I could be speaking to you in a way, in a tone, and reacting to your questions in a way that might be far different than if I was having a conversation with Joe Biden or Donald Trump, or you can name any people,
Right.
Mother Teresa, whatever the person is, the dynamic between the two people and their personalities and the way that they provide information and receive information, and the different emotions and the different life experiences, they can all impact that relationship and communication and dialogue that goes on between two people, so that those two people are different people depending on the people with whom they are dealing. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense. Yeah, I appreciate that. I want to go back to circle back to something that we touched on earlier, which is types of questions. I like to think about communication in terms of listening, and I think great communicators often ask much better questions than good or mediocre communicators. So can you talk a little bit about the types of questions that you ask in a negotiation?
Sure. And I think I'll preface it by saying listening is something that we all can do better. And so in asking the question, it's important to know what questions to ask and how to ask them, but it's even more important to listen to the answer, as opposed to be anticipating what your next question is going to be, because I know that that's a trap that many of us can fall into, where we're more focused on what our next question would be, or how we want to kind of pigeonhole the answer that we're receiving to the question into our own reality or our own sense of what we want the bargain to end up being, as opposed to truly listening to what the other side's saying. So listening is a skill that's very important in our lives and in our negotiations, especially when we want to develop creative solutions that benefit both sides. So having said that, what types of questions might you ask during the course of a negotiation, and when? At the outset of a negotiation, after you've done some preliminary research, you want to put together some open-ended questions that fill in the blanks of really what is the other side all about? What drives their position? So you want to ask very open questions. Explain what your thinking is on your pricing. Might be an open-ended question. Allow them to proceed with a narrative that tells a story as to what their thinking is, what's on their mind, and asking the question why, and allowing them to answer. Why is a great word to use. Why? Don't be afraid of asking for the other side's why, and let them and give them an opportunity to speak. Because sometimes silence allows a lot of information to come in that might not otherwise be coming in, because people are uncomfortable with silence and will speak and give you information that you might not otherwise receive. So open-ended questions is how you begin the discussion, so that you have the foundation of really where the other side is coming from. And then as you learn that information, you can create more narrowly tailored questions on specific topics that are germane to the negotiation. And then finally, you can ask leading questions that, the yes or no type questions that you might ask, that a lawyer might ask on cross-examination, but only after you've gotten the narrative and you've gotten the opportunity to hear the thinking behind the positions and interests, because you want to wait until that point, because you want to be on solid ground to ask those yes or no questions. I'm sorry, to ask those yes or no questions, so that they're sort of the final cherry on top, as opposed to missing a lot of the background behind the reasoning for the party's position.
So I heard open-ended questions, kind of more narrow questions to go a little deeper, and I would call them closed questions, but more like yes or no questions.
Right, leading questions.
Leading questions, yeah. Okay.
That's right.
Absolutely. So to kind of come around full circle, talk a little bit about the range. Talk about negotiating range.
Well, negotiation range is interesting because one side has their information with respect to what their bottom line is, and it's through asking these open-ended questions, narrower questions, and leading questions that we get a better idea for what the other side's ultimate range might be for entering into an agreement. So we look at one thing that we look at is a term called BATNA. The best alternative to a negotiated agreement is the BATNA in a negotiation. So with the premise being that if there is a better alternative than the one that's being offered in a negotiation, then that side believes that there's a better alternative to that negotiated position. That side's not going to agree to that position. Instead, they're going to go and explore what they perceive to be a better alternative. So when both sides believe that the offer or demand that they are entertaining or trying to consider is the best alternative to and there's not a better alternative to that negotiated agreement, that's the point at which the parties will enter into an agreement. And just as a reality check, you might, if let's say you're negotiating a salary and you know that you need $120,000, but you don't know how much the other side can pay. you at least have your side of the BATNA, and you're trying to explore and ask questions to get more information as to what's a realistic amount for the other side, to see if they are at that place that you can enter into an agreement, and B, if they have the capability to arrive at that place. So and that would be the zone of possible agreement is, if you need a salary of $120,000 and the other side can pay, and the other side can pay that amount, but is offered $80,000, like your zone of possible agreement might be some amount between the 80 and the 120, depending on what the reality is of how much the other side can really spend. And you never know for sure what the other side's final authority could be or would be. So you do the best you can to get the best deal that you can and best arrangement from the other side.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of a compromise, really.
That's right.
Coming at it from both sides.
Exactly. And you hope that you're asking enough questions and getting enough preparation and planning, enough information going back and forth that that each side feels comfortable making a reasoned decision to reach an agreement. And that's again, one of the aspects of information exchange and information risk. If you're not giving the other side enough information to make a rational decision on making an offer or demand or proposal, then you're really not helping the negotiation process, and you're not moving toward achieving the result that both sides can reasonably reach an agreement and make a reasonable offer.
Gotcha. Well, I think this is all very, very helpful in, like you said earlier, raising awareness about negotiation and, taking this artificial scenario and making it feel more comfortable and familiar to people. I like to keep people on their toes. And so I'm going to throw a curveball at you here. If you could give one piece of advice to somebody to become a better negotiator, just one simple thing that they could do better, what would that be?
I think the one piece of advice would be to be yourself. Don't try to be somebody else in the negotiation, and don't get baited into being what the other side is trying to make you in the negotiation. So if you're true to yourself and you ask the questions that you think are reasonable, and you arrive at the decisions in a reasonable way, using the kind of framework that we talked about today, then you can sleep well at night, and you can know that you have done everything you can to communicate well, to establish the trust between the two parties in the negotiation, and reach a resolution, hopefully that ends up being an agreement between the parties that meets the needs, interests, and desires of both parties, so that you can have a legitimate and sustainable and long-standing arrangement with the other party.
I like that. I like that a lot. I can't remember who it was that said it. I remember reading somewhere that somebody said, the telltale sign of a good compromise is when both parties are unhappy. And I'm taking it that that's not necessarily true. Both parties can be happy. You just got to, go through the right process.
That's right. And I'm a negotiator and a mediator, and they say that they call a mediation, you're looking for a win-win, and some people say, well, really what you're looking for is a lose-lose, that both sides feel like they lost, so that both parties must have won because neither side feels like they really overtook and dominated the conversation. Yeah.
That's great. So last thing I'll ask you before we go here, your firm, the law office of Richard H. Melnick LLC. Can you just give us a little snippet of what's your scope of work and what type of clients you're working with?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as you mentioned in your kind introduction, my background is having dealt with a lot of commercial transactions and contracts. Also dealing with a lot of negotiations. I've also litigated a bunch of cases, but I prefer to have agreements entered between the parties so that the parties can have self-actualization and come to the resolution themselves. I help small and medium-sized businesses with their negotiations, with their business processes, their operations, developing their organizations, and working through arrangements where they, whether it's consulting agreements or agreements for goods, services, or construction, helping come to agreement and reach agreement with the other side in different settings, and helping them with disputes. At the government setting, helping them work through and navigate the procurement process at the federal, state, and local level, deal with any solicitation protests that might result from that, help them acquire information at the, from governments using the either the Federal Freedom of Information Act or the Maryland Public Information Act. So those are some of the main areas that I assist both governments and businesses in dealing with their operations and business transactions.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's good. I think it's important for people to understand, you know, that this is your business as well. And, you know, I'd certainly encourage you, if you have questions about any of this, to reach out to Richard and talk to him. He is obviously a wealth of knowledge and information, and he's a great guy too. And I'm happy to call him my friend. So thank you so much for talking with me today, Richard. I really appreciate it.
Seth, thank you very much for having me and for asking me the questions that you've asked today. And again, as you point out, I'd be happy to help anybody who's listening with whatever issues they might have that I may be of assistance. So thank you.